G'day, this is Tim Reed, former world champion and head coach at RPG Coaching, and this is The Greg Bennett Show.
Welcome to The Greg Bennett Show. I'm your host, Greg Bennett, and this was an absolutely outstanding conversation with the one and only Tim Reedy, who is one of the all-time great triathletes. We discuss transitioning from being a professional triathlete to sort of finding your way. But then we dive into all of the world's big events going on right now, whether that's the PTO or the Ironman 70.3 or Ironman World Championships, the Olympic qualifying. Absolutely outstanding episode. I love these conversations with Reedy. He's doing a fantastic job now with his coaching business, so go check him out. But I think you're going to enjoy this one as much as I did. I truly loved it. And remember, success comes to those who endure just one moment longer. All right, today's guest is a true legend of the triathlon world. He's an Australian superstar with an impressive resume that includes over 80 professional podium finishes, 23 Ironman 70.3 wins, the Ironman Australia Championship, and his crowning achievement, the Ironman 70.3 World Championship in 2016. He joined me on the show almost 2 years ago to the day, if you can believe it, in episode 90. And that one we were in person. This one we're on other sides of the world. I'm in Florida and he's back in Australia. 6 a.m. back there, I believe, too, by the way. So thanks, mate, for getting up so early. But look, since then, he's transitioned into full-time coaching, and he recently started his own podcast, the Triathlon Therapy podcast, which you got to go listen to. It has a lot of great tips on how to train and everything else. Today's conversation, well, it just promises to be an exploration into the world of triathlon. We'll recap his journey to start, and then we're going to dive deep into just the state of the sport, covering all the major events like the 2023 Ironman 70.3 World Championships, Ironman Kona and Nice World Championships, the Olympics, PTO events, wow, and everything else in between. I'm really looking forward to this one. It's going to be a cracker. So without further ado, welcome, and thanks for joining me once again on The Greg Bennett Show. Tim Reed. Reedy, how are you, mate?
Mate, I'm really good, and thanks so much for having me on. It seems like it was only yesterday that we chatted
Seriously?
in person, and geez, time flies, especially when you're not flying around the world chasing races the same as before. Time even goes quicker just staying at home and watching from a distance.
It does, mate. It was funny, I was like, okay, so I've had Reedy on. Let me just scroll down, the Apple podcast list, and I'm like, I'm still going. It was like 100 episodes ago, and we were chatting in my basement in Boulder, and gosh, yeah, it made me think, I've been doing this podcast a long time now. It's like almost 4 years worth. But mate, where are you? And it's 6 a.m. there. You've gotten up early. What's the day look like?
Well, to be honest, Greg, this is a pretty normal, these are my main work hours. I like to get up at around 5, often coaching a group here by 6 a.m. Probably some of the more fun part of the coaching is the actual face-to-face stuff. And it's funny, the group here is a real mix of athletes. I think when I was racing, obviously as a professional, I thought I'd only be coaching professional athletes when I retired. And I've actually learned that I like to coach across the full spectrum. There's only so much of pros you want to take. Like I think, if you've got 4 to 5 pros, that's sort of the max limit, because it is another level of commitment. There is a certain level of OCD and, anxiety that they bring to the table that it's sometimes just fun to coach people just looking to stay fit and healthy. So that's, these are my regular hours, and it's nice to break it up with another chat to you. Nice. Like I said, I've got my son outside the office right now playing Lego, so anything could happen. No one else is awake in the house, but as long as he stays entertained, we're good to go.
How old are the boys now?
So 4, 9, and 11. So we're sort of getting out of that real crazy zone. I think there's been a few mornings now where we even leave them a note, and I'll run around the block a few times, and it's not a huge stress to be within 5 minutes of the house. We're getting full night's sleeps most nights. So it's
that's awesome. And you're up in Tweed Heads, is that where you are?
I'm in Lennox Head.
South
Byron Bay.
Yeah. What a part of the world to live. My goodness. We just had 6 weeks back home, went to Sydney for a bit. We actually stayed in Noosa for 10 days. boy, the weather just laid on perfectly. It was winter down in Australia, leaving the Florida extreme heat that they've had over here this year to go down to Australia was just absolutely divine. We were so happy to get down there after, almost 5 years, if you include pandemic years, which I don't think we should. I think we should just forget about those years.
Yeah.
Mate, and so how is the coaching? You said you got 3 or 4 pros and you got how many people are you actually coaching in total, and who are the pros you're working with?
4 sort of coaches that work for me, another couple that sort of do a little bit for me. The group's going well. We've sort of, my main partner in it is Clint Rawlings, and Liz Blatchford plays a big role as well. And it's sort of, like I said to you before, I've never really been good at planning things out, but I just sort of fell into it. I was always coaching even a little bit as an athlete, just because I loved exercise physiology and wanted to help out, a couple of young guys who I thought just weren't quite getting it right. And so it sort of happened naturally. It's grown really well. We're sort of looking at what the next phase with it is. There's only so many athletes you can take on with the one-on-one coaching. So we'll branch out into something a little bit more scalable later this year. But it's been fun. I think as an athlete, it is a hard transition to go into the next phase of your life. I'm sure I actually wouldn't even mind talking to you about that and see how you found the transition. But I sort of had to be busy, and I think having something to go into pretty quickly and not let the noise that comes into your mind without training 5 hours a day.
Yeah.
I think it's been really helpful for me personally just to have other people to focus on. It was hard, I think, to go to races to start with and realise, to be on the sidelines. But that sort of longing to be out there has sort of faded, and I get so much pleasure out of watching Steve McKenna win Ironman Australia, for example, or even just watching some of the age groupers I work with, knock off 20, 30 minutes off their times, and to be sort of in tears with them at the finish line. It gives me that same buzz as when I was racing. So yeah, it's been a good transition. When you sort of finished up, was it because it seemed like, you were you had a few issues with the body, and I know you had the run injuries and things like that. Was it a struggle? Because I know I found that first 12 months where I realised I was transitioning, mentally I didn't take it that well.
Yeah, it's funny. Even though it's coming, right? It's still what I didn't realise was it was all about I'd had a purpose for, 27, 30 years as a professional athlete. And then all of a sudden that purpose isn't there. And it's not a matter of just flicking a switch. I think you've said it right. I think the best thing you can do is keep moving and keep that a little bit of purpose somewhere. But I like to explain it as it's you almost lose that cocktail of hormones that you're so used to, of the dopamine, endorphins, oxytocin, serotonin, and you've gotten all of those from driving towards something in sport. And you got that, physically, mentally, emotionally, as you prepared, and then you do the big events, and you'd either, do well or you'd fail. But either way, you had this purpose, and the hormones were always there. And then you stop, and it's not just like, I'll go be a coach, or I'll go do this or whatever. I think there's a physical transition that's got to take place at the hormonal sense. And that took me a little while. I think starting the podcast was great for me. I think, what you're doing, interacting, coaching other people, making sure it's not about you so much. But it did take me longer than I probably had anticipated. And now I can very much comfortably, now it's been 7 years, I'm kind of, I get it. But that transition, I think firstly accepting that it's not just, click a switch and change my mind and now I'm going to be this person. Understanding that I think it is at a deeper hormonal level. And once you understand that, you can kind of gradually work on finding your purpose again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I almost went cold turkey on training to begin with, and realised I was just absolutely miserable, and had to find a way to sort of get up to 90 minutes a day, which sounds excessive for anyone who's not racing. But I agree with you. I think my brain was so conditioned to those chemicals that if I didn't get that, I just didn't feel normal. I felt, it just wasn't right. And I'm slowly whittling that down to now I can do 30 to 45 minutes.
Yes. And then you start loving it.
Not be climbing up the walls.
Now I'm like, okay, 30 to 40 minutes max. Yeah. Now I'm good. I know.
I read a book too. I think it's called Chasing the Sunset by Scott Tinley. He just dives into professional athletes retiring.
Interesting.
And I think it was good that I read that before I actually retired, because it is alarming, the stats on the number of athletes that end up, even who've had lots of money, who end up bankrupt. I think the divorce rate in the first 2 years after retiring is something like 50%.
Wow.
There's just so many issues that pro athletes go through. I mean, obviously there's the loss of identity, but then there's all the brain chemicals. I actually think loss of identity is a big thing too.
Yeah, but I do think at its core, I have a very good friend of mine who, is a world-renowned hockey player and professional athlete. And look, these guys are megastars, and they're retiring with tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. So, the incentive to go work or create a business is not really there on that sense. Whereas when we retire from triathlon, there's still a little bit of like, okay, well, you still got to provide and protect the family. You better do something, right? But but there is all of that I really do believe it is that yes, the identity, but I do believe it's the cocktail of hormones. And I do think it's one of those things that gradually over time, holding somebody's hand and just letting them find the way of finding purpose again and finding things outside of themselves. I think the best thing you've said is that you're helping others. And I do think it's amazing when you help others, how much better you feel in yourself. That it's not just about you trying to improve you. It's like, look, if I help others, now that cocktail of hormones that I'm talking about, it's reignited, right? I think that's a great place to start. And I think if we talk about athletes transitioning, that would be almost the number one place I'd start and say, look, it's not about you anymore, but it is about you helping others and seeing how you can, and whether that's coaching or giving talks or just volunteering at some triathlons, whatever it is, getting out there and starting to help. I do think that's a big one, but it's a fascinating topic and conversation area for me. I think the transition side, I've been texting with Jan, Fedino, who's said that this is his last year, and I said, look, mate, let's just chat. I said, it doesn't have to be a podcast recording because I think he's over me reaching out to. But I said, look, it's I want you to know I'm here as somebody that, I spent 32 years in the sport racing, 27 of those professionally. I know what it's like to be absorbed. And then to slowly walk away. And I think if you can surround yourself with a few other people, maybe you, me, and a couple of others, maybe we start a little group and we'll see where it goes. But in terms of just being there for each other and helping each other transition, I think it's a great idea.
I think too, like you said, that the guys that have been through it, I do think it's important to reach out to the guys that are then going to go through it.
Yes.
Craig Alexander he's been amazing, always has so much going on in his own life. Yeah. But he always just sends a message like, how you doing with it all, checking in. And I think the guys, no one really gets it except for the guys that have been through it. And it does make a world of difference when someone just sends you a message and checks in. And
no, well, so mate, I think there's a group here. I think we're about to start our own little, because I've had the same conversations with Craig, Simon Whitfield, Hamish Carter, and just because you're finishing with a gold medal or world number one or being the GOAT or whatever, it doesn't mean that or if you've just been somebody that's won a couple of races, the transition, it takes a bit. And for some it's quick, some it's easy, others it's going to be a little bit more. And I think it's accepting that it's a process rather than just flicking a switch.
Yeah, good point.
Mate, well, that could be the show, mate. I love that. But hey, before we move on and start talking about the world of triathlon, where it's at, let's do a quick recap on your journey and who you are. Just for I do recommend listeners go back and listen to your episode 90. This time 2 years ago, definitely we dive in deep into your whole journey and everything else. But let's do a quick recap. So, you started sport when, how old were you? And, and what was all that like? And I believe you and Cam Worth were good mates, right?
Yeah, so Cam and I grew up on Lord Howe Island, tiny island, east of Australia. I think it's got 300, 400 people living
Didn't
there.
know anybody lived there, yeah. I thought it was just a...
Yeah. And I was just always a team sports guy. I think I think the generation of top triathletes now, most of them have started triathlon quite young, whereas I finished school and I was actually following a lot of the domestic racing that you and Courtney Atkinson and Crowe and Macca were all doing. And I was like, I'm going to do triathlon. And I think I decided that when I was 16, but I didn't even start training till I was 18. And then I was still playing a bit of rugby, still doing it, Yeah. I was terrible at triathlon because I had no background, but I just loved it. And eventually slowly progressed and got quite serious around 23, 24, and then turned pro when I was 25.
Wow.
But I was just I basically learning to swim at 19 years of age. So I always knew I had an engine because I'd do these rugby fitness tests and I'd be, kicking the ass of guys quite a bit older. And, the rugby coaches would go, why aren't you doing running? You shouldn't be playing rugby.
Yeah.
So there was a level of talent there, but no real history in any of the sports. So, but I think combined with my sort of slightly obsessive personality or addictive personality, triathlon was a good sport for me and kept me out of trouble through my 20s and eventually was able to sort of make a living from it. So
I love that. Yeah. I love that, you open up the, I've got young kids a bit like you, but mine are 3.5 and 5.5 and being in South Florida here, I feel like I'm surrounded by parents that are trying to create world champion athletes from 4-year-olds and, golf and tennis primarily at the forefront. And Laura and I just shake our heads and go, they're going to be fried by 13, 14. These kids are going to be done and they're not even going to love sport. And I love that, to hear someone, look, you can play a lot of sports and then when you find the one that you really enjoy, you might be 18, 19, but then do it with intent. Do it with intent and really go about trying to make it happen. And I love that you were playing rugby and then you found triathlon a few years later. What were some of, the biggest highs of your career? I know I touched on a few of them in the intro there, but some of the greatest highs.
I think it's funny. I look back, I raced in the open category for the first time. It was before there were really 70.3 events going on, but there were half Ironmans in Australia. So there was, I think they had a half Ironman series and I jumped in thinking, I've won my age group a few times. Let's see if I can finish in the top 10 of the pros. And I remember it was Pete Jacobs and I battling it out for second, third. And that was the moment when I was like, maybe I could do this. I finished third, but I was crying in the last kilometre. I was so ecstatic that I even finished on a podium.
That is so cool.
I remember that being as emotional as, coming down the finish line of Ironman Australia as a winner. Or, because I was so shocked that, I could actually maybe do this, that sort of stands out. I think, it's funny that always really sticks out. I think Ironman Australia was a huge moment because I was never a real diesel, a little bit like yourself, but probably not quite as extreme in that I was sort of naturally good over shorter stuff and gradually made that to where I could last for 4 hours, but I was always blowing up incredibly badly in Ironman racing. It really wasn't for me. And so to get an Ironman win when I think I just wasn't that talented at it, that was really special.
That's cool.
Because again, it was that moment where I just didn't expect it. Yeah. And so I think those results where I really blew my mind, 2015, I went into 70.3 world champs, so sure that I could win the race and got my ass kicked. 2016, no expectations. Won the race and was shocked again. I was I sort of come to terms with the fact that I was never going to win this race.
God, that sounds familiar. Sounds so familiar. I love that.
Yeah, I think expectations and pressure can really kill a performance, and just letting go of trying to win.
Yes.
You have these guys who are so set on winning, and that never worked for me.
No.
Whenever I'd let go of winning and just enjoyed the race and just wanted to get the most out of myself, that's when I'd walk away going, shit, that was a really good race,
It's amazing, isn't it? And we keep preaching, focus on the process. And yet, you get caught up going, all right, I am so ready to destroy these guys. I'm going to crush it. And then you go there and you can't get out of your own way. And you're like, oh my God. And then you have these races where, look, I am so underdone. Just try not to embarrass yourself. And I remember the year high V for me, it was like, I turned up in 2011 going, look, there's a couple of bike prems. They're $5,000 each. Just try and get one. That'll be which means you got to be leading at some point on the bike. So I got to the front of the bike, and then it was like, oh, I got one. And then it was, I'm winning the race now. Oh, shit, hang on. It's like, it was such a shock, and it wasn't planned at all. And they're the best wins, aren't they? They're the ones that you're like, what is going on right now?
It's funny that you mentioned that race. I remember I hadn't really met you at that point, but you got into we got into the same taxi to go to the airport after that race. And I remember you were definitely hungover, but you were such a gentleman. I was like, oh, congrats on the win. And you were I could tell you were dusty but you really gave me some time. And I thought, oh, that really stuck in my mind too. So just to mention that, I remember, there's a few other top pros that, as a fanboy I met, and you just get really let down. You're like, oh, they don't have time for me because I'm still pretty shit.
It's disappointing, isn't it? Yeah.
It was a special moment. First of all, just because the way you destroyed that race, and then
I remember that night. So the night after the race, we're in Des Moines, Iowa on a Sunday night. There's not a lot of places to go, but then we found this tiny little bar. And I remember Chris McCormack coming out, and I knew he was racing the next week to try and qualify for the Australian team for the Olympics for 2012, which was a very long shot, mind you, but he still wanted to give it a go. And he was such a mate, because he actually said, no, mate, I'm going out with you. We're going to celebrate. I was like, oh, thanks, buddy. And we went in there, and there was probably, 30 people showed up or whatever, 50 people maybe. And, I always feel as an Aussie, whenever you win a race, especially if it's a decent prize money, you shout, what we say in Australia, you shout the bar, or you buy the bar. And I remember trying to get everybody, drinking and having a few. And even there were some locals in there, probably 20 locals. And I just said to the bartender, look, I've got the tab. And it ended up being about $600. I was like, I thought I was going to be this massive big spender. And it was like, no, it was a small little tavern. It really wasn't that bad, but it was a special night, mate. So I probably was a bit hungover in the taxi with you the next day.
No, you did well. You still gave everyone time, which is
I appreciate it, buddy. Important. So look, when we look back, were there some lows along the way that you were able to really learn from?
Yeah, I think a lot of lows. Like I think for every high you have just as many lows.
Yeah,
and that's,
at least.
It's the roller coaster of racing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always the exceptions to the rule who are just freaks of nature, but I certainly wasn't in that category. No. And I think the last couple of years were really hard. I mentioned to you before we started, my heart was giving me more and more issues with subventricular tachycardia, and it just got to, it used to happen once a year, and it was happening every single race. And when you feel like you can't rely on your body anymore,
it's scary.
That was what I found really hard. The will was still there. I still had good sponsorship. There was nothing really holding me back except my bloody heart would go out of rhythm when I'd, as soon as I'd push up above 160 heart rate. And so that was hard, I think, letting go. And then there was other races. One year in Kona, I'd ridden my way into third, thinking this is after a pretty average 2017 where I'd had a few health issues. Finally got it together for Kona, rode into third, and then punctured, and then stood on the start line. They didn't have any. I had to wait for the age group wheel support because they'd had 3 or 4 punches in the last 10K, and just watching, months of work. I don't think people realise with a race like Kona the expense to train up for it properly too.
Yeah.
I'd done the altitude camp, I'd done the heat camp, I went all in on it that year. For me, once I'd won 70.3 worlds, the appeal of chasing that race never really, it was done. The next step
Tick
for
box.
me was Kona.
Yep.
And so I went all in on it, and, I remember just going, oh, I can't believe it. I'm finally in this race. Normally I'm, it was happening. And then just standing there for 10 minutes watching the whole race go away. Those sort of moments, it takes months to bounce back from.
Yes.
And, with a family and Monica, I did a lot of it solo too. Monica had her own career back home. And so a lot of it was very lonely. It was hard on Monica. It was hard on me. And then those sort of moments, I think I retired about 50 times through my career in the middle of races.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then, so yeah, I'm sure you had similar times. Does anything stand out for you that was particularly heartbreaking?
Oh, for me,
yeah,
mate, like you, I think everybody sees a professional athlete and they see your wins and we celebrate them, and it's like that's kind of what everybody likes to remember. But Laura and I often laugh that we feel like we were injured or on the sidelines more than we were probably in the game competing at the highest level. And I think the biggest one for me was probably the 2000 Olympics and just being left off that team, which was a little bit out of my hands. I do take a bit of responsibilities. I think I could have been in better shape than I was at the qualifications, but it came down to the selectors. That really hurt being left off that team. Specifically because that was a course that really suited me. I was at home and everything about that was really dark. Escape from Alcatraz. I never won that race. I finished on the podium. I don't know how many times, but I remember one year I was coming back from, I think, Ishigaki, Japan or Gamagori, Japan. I'd won the weekend before in the World Cup and knew I was going pretty well. And I went to Alcatraz thinking, well, if I can get off the bike with Chris McCormack and Craig Walton, I believe I can win. And I got out of the water with Craig Walton and I end up getting off the bike a minute in front of him and 2 minutes in front of Chris McCormack, having one of those days, when your body just lights up and you're just like, whoa. Yeah. And rather than going, okay, I've got it won and just don't do anything stupid, I was like pure ego-driven idiot going, I'm going to smash these guys. And I remember getting to the turnaround on the beach. And anybody who's done Escape from Alcatraz knows it's a fun run, but it's tough. It's got stairs and single track and you run down to the beach and along the beach and back up the sand ladder. And it was at the top of the sand ladder. I'm like, oh, I don't feel too good. And I had a 4-minute lead on the beach. And then all of a sudden just the wheels came off and I collapsed. And it was the first time I met Chris, who's the Uber biker? From Lieto. Chris Lieto just sat with me on the sideline as I'd passed out and then carried me in and I had 2 IVs at the finish and everything else. It was just when you just have an event, it's Escape from Alcatraz. It wasn't a world title, but it was just one that I never got to win Noosa and I never got to win Escape from Alcatraz. And those two kind of sting me a little bit that I'd never turned up on the right day for those. I have plenty more, but this show's not about me. I could keep going.
People would
but
be more interested in in a lot of your races.
Well, look, when I'm on your podcast, we can talk about those. But I think
you're just mentioning the Olympic selections.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it now? Has it especially from a Australian perspective, are there countries that you think are doing it well? And do you like the way Australia's doing it? I noticed too, Joel Filiol's just moved on from TA, which I found interesting. I'd love to know the goss on that, which I don't have any insight.
No, I don't either. I think I've been heavily involved in both the Australian and US because Laura going through the US. I think it's very difficult for federations to get it right. There's a lot of pressure, not only from within the sport, but then also the Olympic federations, the oversee, the USOC or the AOC for Australia and the requirements that have to be met in the ways that things are meant to be done. Now, I would love to say, hey, the first spot is just done on the World Triathlon Series ranking. Like, honestly, if you've turned up over and over again. It was like Gwen Jorgensen. She would go on, what did she do? I've forgotten the statistic. But if I said she won 15 of 15 starts over the 3 years leading into Rio, and still she had to qualify for the US Olympic team. Well, to me, that was madness. I just, here's a woman who's just demolished the world. And in that scenario, you should just pick the team. There was another situation 4 years before that where I was sitting down with the US team and saying, hang on, you've got Sarah Haskins, Sarah McClarty, and Laura Bennett. The three of them can train together in quiet in Florida for 6 months. No one's going to swim with them, maybe a Helen Jenkins, maybe one or two others. The three of them could team time trial off the front, and there's a good chance you're getting a gold and silver medal if you plan it out and you have the balls to do it right. And they laughed at me. Oh, no, we have to have a qualifying process which is fair for everybody. And I said, well, it's not fair for your best, though, is it? You've made it fair for average. I'm talking about making it, and I want to win a gold medal. What's the whole goal here? You know? Yeah. And so, yes, don't get me wrong. I was very biased towards Laura. So, of course, I'm a little blinded by that. But so on one extreme, I'm saying, hey, you just pick a team and you create that gold medal and you do whatever you can. The next one, I'm kind of saying, hey, you should look at the world rankings and pick where you are in the world rankings. And then the final one that a lot of the federations keep doing, and I don't agree with, is having a one-off qualifying event that has no relation to the World Series. It's often a smaller field, less people turn up, the conditions aren't the same, and all of a sudden you have these random people making Olympic teams and you're leaving your best on the sidelines. But look, Australia doesn't have a problem at the moment in terms of picking. You know, we have Matt Hauser, really. I mean, the guy's on fire, and I just hope they do right by him and don't make him jump through a whole bunch of hoops. But a country like France have got the same problem Australia had 20 years ago, where they've got so many, especially the men. Their men's team, they've got so many to choose from. They're gonna be leaving really phenomenal athletes on the sideline. So, look, it's a tricky one to get right. I think if I was a high performance leader, I would be saying between say Paris and LA, I'd be saying, look, we'll be picking the two highest people on the World Series rankings, leading the qualifying process, the 18 months leading into the games. So long as you're top 20 or so, I actually make that quite a big window. And then the final spot we'll probably be doing as either domestic, or if they're ranked 20th to 30th or something, we'll definitely lean on them, that kind of thing. So it just depends on what you're trying to do. If I'm a high performance manager, I'm trying to figure out how to win a gold medal.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I've always leaned towards, I like a really clear, objective qualifying system. I think discretion, I understand the angle that you're coming from, where you do what you can to get the best chance of a gold medal. I sort of think you make it a year, you got to make it specific to the actual course you're going to race. Yes, have a qualifying event long enough out that people can target it. And then obviously you still got to take into account rankings and things like that. But as soon as there is discretionary powers, I feel like it gets very, very complicated.
Yes. I agree with you. With you.
It's a tough one.
But I do look at the countries. If you look at now who's won the gold medals, and you look at people, whether it be Simon Whitfield or Nicola Spirig or Christian Blumenfeld, or these people from the smaller countries that don't have to jump through as many hoops. Now, Alistair Brownlee, he's an enigma. Okay, so you put all the pressure on the world on that guy, and he's still going to perform. But it does seem to me that if you're going to put a bunch of pressure, amazing amount of pressure on your best athletes to perform a year out, or even closer to the game, sometimes they're doing only 3 to 4 months before. Now you're requiring your athletes to peak twice in a very short period of time. And look, some athletes don't peak anymore. Some, like Christian Blumenfeld, is able to stay at the best. He's having one long peak for 5 years. But I think, I do look back when Simon won his, or even Hamish to a lesser degree, but Jan to a lesser degree, he had to qualify. But they weren't having to kill themselves in qualifying. They were able to turn up to the Olympics fresh and just sort of come and hit it out of the park. When you see Olympic teams being finalised within 3 to 6 months of the actual event, I think that's crazy. It's got to be, you find your best a year out and give them time to really plan out the whole 12 months ahead. Yeah. I agree with that. No, look, mate, and look, talking Olympics, we might as well dive into this a little bit. We got, it's Tuesday morning in Australia, Monday here in Florida, and at the end of this week, they've got the test event for Paris. Yeah, I was actually reading something where Christian Blumenfeld will be at the test event in Paris. 2 days later, he's racing, I don't know if he's still doing this, but he's racing Singapore PTO. And then the week later, he's doing the 70.3 Worlds in Finland. So let's start with KB. Can he pull off something like that? And how do you think he's going to go at the test event anyway?
I don't know. It's I would have had strong opinions a while ago, and now he keeps proving me wrong. And I said he'll never do well in Kona. He just seemed too big. He has cramping issues.
Yeah.
And I just thought there's no way. And then obviously he still did fantastic in Kona. I remember watching him as maybe 7-8 years ago race in Mooloolaba. And I feel really bad about this, but Clayton Patel and I are on the sidelines laughing, going, "This guy should be playing in the front row for he's
a unit, he's solid,
it just didn't add up. And then obviously he's just continually doing fantastic across all distances. I can't think of anyone who's been that versatile within the same season or within the same block of racing.
Weeks. It's not. It's like
you see guys like obviously Jan won a gold medal in ITU, but then when he shifted to long course,
that was 5 years later, mate. That was 5 years later.
Exactly.
And then you go back to Mark Allen and Greg Walsh, and they were doing it, and take nothing away from them. I put Mark Allen and Greg Walsh as two of the greatest of all time, and even today I think they perform remarkably well. So I'm taking nothing away from them.
Yeah.
But there wasn't quite the depth, if we must be honest, at both Ironman and Nice and all those events. So to watch Christian sort of jump around like he does. I mean, he's in Super League races, and then it's going to be fascinating watching this. He's got a 9-day block, and he's doing it's not just the racing, it's the travel. He's in Paris, then he's in Singapore, then he's back in Finland.
Yeah.
Racing the very best in the world. I mean, because a lot of countries are turning up to Paris, and, it's often used as a selection race. At least for 1 or 2 spots for each team. If you podium at Paris, often you're a walk-on to the Olympic team. And I don't know what Christian has to do there himself, but phenomenal. And then he still wants to go win Singapore, which has got a stacked field in the heat.
Yeah.
And then back to 70.3 Worlds to, try and crush that again.
It will be very interesting to follow. I mean, you'd have to say it's too much. I think,
as a coach, would you recommend this?
Something he's doing, he proves me wrong. So I don't want to. I feel like an idiot even saying it. But
no, I know.
If I was the coach, I'd be like, "This is silly."
Yeah, I know. But I mean, I've enjoyed watching it because, like to your point, I've enjoyed being proven wrong. Like we've all said, you should be doing this, and you should do this, and blah, 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 and this is what the science tells us. And then you got this guy going, no, screw the science, I'm going to do this and this. You're like, wow. I mean, hey, were you surprised with Jan Frodeno a couple of weeks ago in US Open?
Funny, we did a piece on it on the podcast before the race, and I said I think he'll prove everyone that he can still beat everyone.
Nice. You picked it.
He's the Mr. Professional with the training. He knows how to. He's just proven over and over again that he can get himself into the best possible shape when he wants to. He doesn't over race now. I think he never turns up unless he's ready to go. I mean, there's quite a few races where he's been at the race and then he's been slightly sick, hasn't raced. Even in Nice, I think he'll. I'm not entirely sure about that course for him. I think if it was Kona, I'd say I think he can 100%, finish off as the champion. But Nice obviously brings up a whole different dynamic with that course. And I know Jan's an exceptional descender on the bike. He certainly knows how to push it in training, which is why he's had a few crashes. But he is, exceptional on the descent. I don't know how he climbs compared to the Norwegians. What are your thoughts there?
I know. I was studying Nice when they came out with the course, and it was only about 1,800 more feet of climbing than Kona. Believe it or not, I think Kona is 5,600 feet of climbing, and I think this one's about 7,800 or something, or maybe close to 8,000 feet of climbing. So this one does have probably close to 2,000 to 3,000. Most of that is in one climb. There's that secondary climb at about 120K, 125K of about 6K. And that to me is a launch pad. If you want to try and break somebody and try and give yourself a decent, 3 to 5 minute start for the marathon, that's not a bad place to do it. I actually just don't think anybody's going to try and crush that first 18 kilometer climb. It's just, the point is it's too early, and you got the rest of the bike and a full marathon to go. I think Jan will climb exceptionally well. The guy knows how to get himself very, very light, and so he's never carrying an ounce of extra weight. He definitely is somebody that I think when it comes to climbing and descending, he's going to be more than capable. And then I think his marathon on the flat, I think he's got a decent leg speed, but he's going to have to drag them out. It's going to have to be a very fast marathon from the start. And I don't know. I still think Jan can win. I look at guys like Max Newman and, guys that have been sniffing for a bit, potentially there. But yeah, look, Christian, he's going to be in the mix again. It's funny. I don't know where to put Christian. Is he going to be focusing on the Olympics, or is he going to be focusing on the Nice and trying to win an Ironman, another Ironman world title, because he did win Utah when we had it there during the pandemic. So he actually is an Ironman world champion already.
Yeah. It's easy to forget that.
Yeah. And then Magnus Ditlev, the guy is, man, he's a machine too. I don't know what happened to him in the US Open. I know he pulled off the course there. Do you know what was going on?
I don't know if it was GI distress.
Oh, yeah.
I think wearing a white suit, you probably couldn't get away with just letting it go. So
no. I would say I still have Jan for the win in Nice. I actually have Max Newman running into second. And then I think probably a Magnus in third, maybe a Sam Laidlow up there as well. But who's your pick? You're going to give me three? Can you give me three?
But is Gustav out of the race?
Gustav, I was reading something. He's had a bit of a rougher year. Yeah. I think potentially he'll be back. I know he had, it was a devastation with his mum and a whole bunch of things. So I think it's been a bit of off for him. I wouldn't say he's out by any means. No, I mean, the fact that I haven't mentioned a Norwegian on my podium is probably pretty nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, for what they've been doing. But I don't know. Obviously, I have a soft spot for an Aussie to get up there. Jan Frodeno, I think he's desperate to make a farewell song here. I think the guy's going to leave everything he has to try and create, that be his last. It'll be interesting.
I mean, if Gustav is fit, you got to remember he rode, destroyed that course when it was 70.3 Worlds.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Road bike.
That's when he really came into everybody's radar, wasn't it? Yeah.
And he wasn't exactly he was having solid results in leading up to it in the ITU, but he wasn't setting the world on fire. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him still be right up there, just with the way he climbs and descends, and obviously, yeah.
Wonder if he'll do it on a road bike.
Year, but we'll see. Yeah.
Wonder if he'll do it on a road bike again.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there'll be a lot of converted road bikes. I had a chat. Who were we talking to? Braden Curry, about what he was going to do, and we sort of, for the lighter guys, that time trial bike can be quite a penalty on quite a steep climb. Yeah. I always struggled in hilly races because, I was carrying 8 or 9 kilos of bike plus bottles sometimes. Yeah. And if as a percentage of my body weight racing at 62 kilos, it really hurt me. And then, you look at who the best climbers are in the sport. They're always around that 74, 75 kilo mark. Lionel Sanders, classic example. Sam Long's a big dude, and they climb really bloody well. And I think they can get away with taking a time trial bike uphill. Whereas I think a lot of the lighter guys will have a 6.5, 7 kilo road bike just with an aero front end.
Yeah, that's good feedback.
To do that.
That's good. And honestly, even the road bikes now are so super aerodynamic. It's more about you fit than it is the frame. I mean, you can probably tell me more about that. Yeah, but
when you consider, I mean, I deal with this every day with clients, but people love to drop $10,000 to $15,000 on a bike, and yet, a helmet choice can make a bigger difference than the difference between frames at the moment.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's a constant battle between common sense and their will.
Hey, what do you think about the women then? They'll be in Kona. I am so bummed that we're not all together. I think it's just, I'd rather all be in Nice together than be splitting the men and women. That's my, and obviously I'd love to just keep everything in Kona, but whatever. I'm sure they've got their reasons.
I mean, I'm the opposite. I love that it's a rotating world champs. I think Kona should always be like the Tour de France. I think that had to keep that really special, put $1 million up for grabs, that sort of thing to make it prestigious. But I love that everyone gets a chance at a world title over the Ironman distance, regardless of their genetic traits. I think Kona does exclude some guys.
Oh yeah. No, I agree with that. Look, it took Chris McCormack 7 years before he could win, and
I think he would have had more.
100% he would have
more world titles.
100% he would have. I've said that to him a bunch of times. He was the greatest Ironman athlete for 5 years there, but had to keep trying to figure out heat and humidity. And then you got Crowe, who's the greatest heat and humidity racer I've ever competed against, ever. Whether that's Lifetime Fitness or whatever, it just didn't faze him at all. And every year they put the Ironman world champs in a hot, humid place. Yeah.
And even the 70.3 worlds, like when he won in Vegas, it suited him perfectly.
Yeah.
I think what was impressive is Crowe also, he was able to adapt. He still had some, fantastic race in Melbourne.
Oh, absolutely. No, I didn't mean to cheapen any of his career. Absolutely not.
Yeah. But and that's why I like that it rotates. I think it changes the dynamic, but I also think Kona's so special. You never want to lose that. So there is a way to keep it special, and to keep it special, you dump a heap of money into it for prize purse.
In
terms of the women for Nice, for Kona,
you got Daniela with her performance.
I feel like Daniela is
in Roth was unbelievable.
To see her not doing fantastic again.
Yeah. Well, you got the runners. You got sort of. I don't know if it's going to change. You got Daniela and Lucy, Charles Barkley. So you got Lucy leading out, holding them all off on the bike. Daniela having a monster bike, and then you got the runners, obviously with Annie Hug and Chelsea Sodaro. And I know I'm leaving out names, so don't everybody be yelling at me. But if you think about the big four, in my mind, I mean, it's hard to go past Daniela again for the women. Every time people want to write her off, one of the all-time greatest to ever do the sport just says, hey, I'm back. Watch out.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, exactly. I think, obviously the effect for Chelsea Sodaro, I think being a mum, there's a little bit of unpredictability there.
Yeah.
You go through, you can have a couple of bad weeks with your kid not sleeping and things can change pretty quickly.
That's a very good point.
I did all my pro racing pretty much with, 1 to 3 kids into managing that. And it could very much determine how a month or two goes. And obviously, she's got a husband in full support, but that always leaves me like, oh, anything could happen. I hope she does fantastic. I found it really inspiring, obviously last time. But yeah, Anne Haug, I think, is still a major factor. If anyone, I think it's probably between Lucy, Daniela, and Anne. I think Lucy puzzles me in that I feel like she's got a different bike fit every time I see her race, and I'd love to see her get that sorted.
Is that right? Yeah, you would notice more than I have. Yeah, you notice.
I'm in a sort of a chat group with a couple of bike fitters, and we're all just like, "What is going on?" Like sometimes the seat's too high, sometimes it just looks like there's a few changes happening. That
Lucy, are you listening? I got to get her back on the show. It's been a little while.
And this is coming from a guy who changed my fit every single day.
I think you changing tires and fits and everything the night before.
My anxiety used to make me do lots of crazy things. So I'm never one to. I shouldn't be judging, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch. But we know that it's going to be Daniela and off the front, and can she be caught? That last 60K of the bike is always so special to watch, and it's that's the Brett Sutton special. That's where the time really gets gained, and everyone else is dropping off. And Daniela seems to get 7 or 8 minutes in that last little portion.
Phenomenal. Whatever she does, she must ride like a 52-minute last 40K or something. It's insane the way she comes home.
Yep.
Everyone's like, yeah, Daniela's not doing anything this year. And it's like, whack.
and then the race is on, and we'll see if Anne can to bring it back, or Chelsea or Lucy. I think Lucy. It'd be really interesting to see Lucy and Daniela get off together and make that.
That would be good. It'd be a good run because Lucy's really improved her run.
Lucy's got that potential. We'll just wait and see.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be fascinating. All right, let's move back to the middle distance. We've got the Singapore coming up this weekend with the PTO. Taylor Knibb was unbelievable back in the US. I don't think she's racing Singapore. Ashley Gentle is yet to be off a podium at these PTO races. I think she'll be the hot favourite going in. But then the week following, 70.3 World Championships in Finland. Do you have any idea who's going to be the hot favourites for that one?
For Finland, it's interesting. It's I don't know. Is the short answer. I think it's I think there's going to be some guys who are probably laying low and haven't been racing, jumping around the globe chasing these PTO races. That could be a real factor. I'm very biased, but Steve McKenna, who doesn't normally listen to me, I convinced him to just focus on one race. And so he's been training at altitude in Switzerland. We're seeing numbers that I think are, he's at an all-time peak in terms of how he's going.
Nice.
It's a flatter course, so it's going to come down to a swim and run race. I think there's just not enough with the media, with only 10 meters between bikes. I can't see the race splitting up that much. So I think it's going to come down to a 108, 109 run off the bike, and we will see. I think it's not going to. I don't think it's going to be usual suspects. And we'll see how tired people are. That's a lot of travel, a lot of racing.
It's a lot of big racing now. What about, Jason West's run at the US Open?
So is he doing Singapore?
I don't know if he's doing Singapore. I should have to start
for the sake of 70.3 Worlds that he's not.
His run,
he's got a real shot.
Yeah, I think his run, and I think his confidence he's carrying because of that run. Listening to him, and he said, he almost gave up that many times, and then just went to hell with it. It's like we talked about earlier in the show. Removing expectation and just going. I think he just surprised the hell out of himself that he was able to run all the way up into second, and it wasn't just. He ran a 56 and the next best was a 101. He's running low 31s for the 10K and everybody else is running mid 33s. It's for people to understand, that is ginormous. I retired from sport because I was always running, that's between 30 and 31 off the bike, and that would, either get you a win or on the podium. And I retired because I started running 32s. And once you're running 32s, you're losing a minute and people are running past you and like, oh, I'm done. There's a huge numbers. That's huge numbers that he's going to be getting off the bike with. To your point, if it's a swim run and it stays together closer on the bike, and it's 21K, not 18, man, he's a hard one not to really put high on your gambling bet.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting whether guys like Ben Canute and if there can be a little breakaway in that swim. It does change the dynamics a lot. You know what it's like in these big races. It's the front few guys with the media around. And even though it will be reduced, obviously, because of the horrific incident, in which race was it? Sorry,
that was the European PTO, was it, James? No, it
was an Ironman event.
It was Ironman. Sorry. Yes, it was. It was Ironman, yes.
That can give them that extra, it depends if they have a media, some motorbikes with the second group, but not normally. So, Laidlow, potentially Ditlev. If these guys do get a little gap in the swim, it changes things a lot for Jason.
It does.
If that group does stay together, and if it's a wetsuit swim, I'm pretty certain. So that changes things a lot. I think it could be one big group. And if that's the case, I'm looking at guys like Jason West, Steve McKenna, these real exceptional runners to be able to.
How's Max Newman doing? I know he had a bit of a break after his.
It's always so hard to know. He doesn't put anything on social
media. I know. I want to get him on the
well,
podcast, and we were going to get him on the podcast a few weeks back, and I think we've sort of paused it for the moment. But I'm very curious as to see if he's in that sort of European PTO shape that he was.
A cooler race. I think Max is one of those guys. We're talking about guys who can perform in the heat.
Yeah.
I've never noticed any real difference between his hot race pace and his cold race pace. And that's not to take away from Max, but he's exceptional in the heat.
Yeah. But look at his Kona performance.
Sunshine Coast when he beat Steve last year, that was cool. And he did rate. What was exceptional about that race? He sat on the front of that group for probably 2/3 of the bike and still outran everyone.
Oh, he's a monster.
So I think he's up there for sure. If it was a hot and humid race, he'd be up there as probably my number one pick. But when the heat and humidity is taken away, a few other guys can come into his realm.
Some of the bigger guys will be fine in Finland. It's going to be quite cold, I imagine, and maybe even a bit wet. It'd be interesting. Someone like a Ben Canute, I'd love to see him have another podium performance. Lionel Sanders, we haven't mentioned him. He's been a bit quieter this year, do you think?
Yeah, I think I wonder how he's going. He's probably at that point where he might have seen the peak years, and then, he's such a competitor, and the new wave is coming, and he's sort of missing that group, obviously in the PTO races, and it's a hard ride back up. And then I don't know. I would personally think he's so good at climbing, but not descending. So if he does. I'm assuming he's doing Nice. I'm not sure about 70.3 Worlds.
I don't know if he's qualified for Nice yet.
Okay, interesting.
I don't know. I think I might have read something on that. People are going to tell me all of these statistics. Like the amount of events that we're covering in this chat right now, you and I are all over the place. But all right, well, how about with the women at 70.3 World Champs? I'd love to see Ash, Ashley Gentle. She's done exceptional over this distance from moving from the Olympics. I'd love to feel like I had a part of it, by the way. When I had her on the podcast a few years ago, she's like, I'm thinking about, leaving the whole Olympic campaign and going to middle distance. I'm like, leave the Olympic campaign right now. You've had your turn. Go be a professional in the middle distance and potentially long eventually. And boy.
Yeah, we said that. Most of us have been saying it for years. Like, what is she doing? She could be cleaning up. And then I think her first or second race, she takes home 100K.
I know.
And speaking of Jason's exceptional run, Ashley's pretty much the same. There's no one. She's minutes ahead on the run.
Amazing.
I think Finland will be. I see it very hard for her to be beat. I think it's the same as the men. If there is a breakaway in that swim, if Taylor Knibb gets a jump on her out of the swim and then is biking a couple of minutes ahead, then it changes the whole dynamic. But if it's a mass group out of the swim, I can't see Ashley losing.
Wow. It's a big call. Because Taylor Knibb was impressive in Wisconsin. My goodness.
Yeah.
Her bike, unbelievable. It's just
amazing.
I think they're the two hot favorites. Obviously, we've got Emma Plant-Brown and Holly Lawrence and Paula Finley, and we're leaving out a lot of names, but it's been incredible to watch. Flora Duffy's been a little quiet this year. I think probably with a few injuries. I don't know if I've seen her around much, but yeah, I got a feeling Ash could probably pull this one off as well in Finland. I hope so.
It's going to be the course to do it. And the only thing that will be a factor, and it always plays a role, is the travel to Europe.
Yeah.
The Europeans drive a few hours and they turn up, and it only needs to be a couple of %.
Well, where's Ashley now? Is she in Europe or is she in the US? She's not back in Australia.
I'm assuming she would be, but I know she was in Boulder.
Well, she's on the start list for Singapore, though.
Okay. Hard not to be when there's that much money up for grabs.
I know.
I don't blame her.
She's done so well. Yeah.
So I think, whenever the world champs have been in Europe, you tend to see 7 to 8 out of the top 10 are Europeans.
Yeah.
And sometimes guys and girls you haven't really
never heard of. Yeah.
And the same thing when it was in Australia, 6 of the 7.
Well, who won the 70.3 Worlds? Who's that guy that won 70.3 Worlds? It was last in Australia.
I'll bring it up whenever I can.
Oh, is that where we were segueing? Sorry, no.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Well, we still the big one. Okay, let's pick. What about the Olympics? Have you watched much of the World Series stuff? I know it's a bit of a shorter distance.
I have to be honest, I haven't.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Hayden Wilde. Had him on the podcast. I don't know. You guys need him on your podcast. He's just, he brought me to tears. That's how this guy, just his story. And I asked him, he had such a great year. And I asked him, this was 18 months ago, and I asked him, what did you do with all your prize money? He said, well, I paid off my mum's mortgage. She's 55 and she shouldn't have to be. I was just like, oh my God, you're just such a good human being. And I've just loved watching that guy race, and I'd love to see him win gold. I haven't had Alex Yee on the show, in fairness, and I'm sure he's a great guy too, but I'd love to see Hayden have a big win at the Olympics. And then I think, somebody, I'd love obviously, we have an Aussie man that is actually showing the world that, with Matt Hauser and his year, I don't know. I think he could go in a little under the radar. Yes, he won in Montreal this year. Big win. First time he had the big win. And he's going very well, but I think he could be one to watch as well for us Aussies. But it will be a French. I think there's going to be 1, 2, 3 French guys that are really pushing it for that one on the men's side.
I think, as a fan, I love seeing the camaraderie even between Alex Yee and Hayden Wild.
Oh, it's cool, isn't it?
It's just such good sportsmanship. Those top few guys. Yeah, I think Matt Hauser and Hayden Wild, I love that they seem very well-rounded triathletes.
Yes.
There's obviously, for someone watching ITU over the years, there was always that feeling you'd see a specialist runner who would win some of the races, and it was a little bit, obviously that changed with the Brownlees. They just started riding away from everyone.
You better be able to do everything.
Change the game again.
Yeah.
But I love seeing when a triathlete who's just magnificent across the swim, bike, run. I love to see them do really well, and Hayden certainly seems to fit the bill, as does Matt.
Well, you got Matt Hauser, Hayden Wild. We've got to throw in Christian Blumenfeld's name again. Talk about him in 70.3 and Ironman, but we're also going to talk about the Olympics next year. He is, the reigning Olympic champion. He won in Tokyo, and he ran away from Alex Yee and Hayden Wild, who are both, by the way, low 13-minute 5K runners. Like 5K, like we've never comprehended. Like to me, I remember I ran a low 14-minute, and for me, that was like the biggest thing in triathlon. These guys are running 40 seconds up the road. They're 200 meters in front.
I will say, though, Greg, that low 14, if you then add in 4% advantage from the current shoes.
Oh, then I'm at 11 minutes.
You're probably not that far off. That's what
you're very kind,
reminding the young guys these things.
They're called the 4%ers, so we're not making numbers up. They said they're 4% better. So
when Nike put out their preliminary papers on it, it was a range of 0 to 6% benefit. So there were guys getting up to 6% advantage, and some athletes who weren't getting anything. So the whole it's a level playing field because everyone gets the advantage isn't actually true.
Depends on your biomechanics.
Athletes. It really does. And
interesting.
I've done heaps of testing with athletes. We just cycle through shoes and do blood lactates and work out which shoe works best for them. And it is fascinating.
Really?
Some people who do really well in the Nikes and others that don't, then you put them in an ASICS and suddenly it works for them. So, the same way that I won't be long before you probably can get online and customize your carbon plate to what works for you.
Oh, that's awesome. Crazy. Well, there's a business for you right there, mate. Why don't you become the world leader in that expertise? I love that. That's so cool. The only experiments I've had with these, shoes is I was coaching an athlete 4 or 5 years ago, and when they were first coming out, and I think Terenzo Bozzoni, our good friend Terenzo, had been winning a few Ironmans and 70.3s. I think he was one of the first I ever saw wearing them. And the guy I was training with had a couple of pairs, so I went and he wasn't around, so I threw them on and ran down the hallway. And I was like, holy crap, I might have to make a comeback. I remember just thinking, wow, I'm spring-loaded down this place. So I think I was more like the 4 to 6%.
Right.
Boy, they felt special.
Yeah. I was bummed because when they first came out, I went and did a bunch of testing with Burkle, and I made him cycle through shoes, and he was getting it was about, I think at 320K pace, he was like 12 heart rate difference. And,
wow.
And I was like 3.
Oh,
I was
really?
I was
Wow.
devastated. I just didn't get any advantage from it because I'm a real cadence runner, and it was lifting my feet. I just couldn't get the stride length I needed to.
Is it the
I've
way you
always needed
hit
that.
the ground? Is that what you've noticed? If people hit the ground harder rather than shuffle more, they're
It's the
getting more of
longer
a...
legs, the bigger leg stride,
Yeah.
sort of that Kenyan where your heel's hitting your bum sort of thing. I think.
I would have
now
been
there's a big
perfect then, mate. I'm a pure Kenyan runner. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Hey, let's move on. The women's Olympic Games. I have a very soft spot for Cassandra Beaugrand being home soil in France. I think it'd be kind of cool for a Frenchie to win on home soil in Paris. And Cassandra, the way she's performing is just off the chart. But it's not going to be the Brits. The British women have just been outstanding for so long. If Georgia Taylor-Brown can, stay healthy, Beth Potter. You heard of Beth Potter when she broke that 5K world record in that little 5K she did in it was a road race. Absolutely phenomenal.
I remember it's popping up somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not fully across it. I've watched Super League, and I've got some respect, but I'm not across.
No. Look, mate, if you think about what you have to watch these days, if you want to keep up, you've got to watch all the Super Leagues. You then got to watch all the World Triathlon Series, World Championship races, and there's relays in there as well. Then you go to the PTO and their 100K races. Then you go to the Ironman 70.3 and then the Ironmans. And then you got to raise 3 kids and run a business. So
yeah, exactly.
I think the women's racing I still think is actually kind of pretty open as is the men's, which is what I kind of like. It's not a Gwen Jorgensen domination or if Flora gets herself back healthy, she's just extraordinary, and she is the defending champion. But it'll be interesting. Look, we're still a year out from the games, but watching the test event this weekend or this Thursday, Friday, I just looked that up. That's 2 a.m. for me to watch it. So I won't be watching that live. But yeah, it'll be interesting, mate. There's a lot of racing. Obviously, we've got the Super League, like you said, that's about to start up again with London, Toulouse, Malibu, and Neom. Chris McCormack's crushing it with that series. And I think that's such a great feeder for our sport. I just hope some of these, it can continue and they can continue to have a big audience and get big sponsorships. It's not easy to keep these things going. They're a lot of money. But mate, before I let you go, we've covered a lot. Loved this chat with you. A couple of questions for you. And I'm not sure if I asked you these ones last time, but I'm going to ask them again anyway. I want to rewind the clock. You're 16, 17. What do you tell yourself?
Whoa. I think if I was 16, 17, I'm just a big believer in, I think work ethic is just one of the things that I learned whenever I am just consistently working hard at something, you don't have to be crazy with that work ethic, but just consistency of applying it day in, day out. I think telling myself that can lead to great things was, I mean, I fell into it anyway. I did have, I had a dad who really taught me a good work ethic early on by sending me to work in washing dishes in kitchens every school holidays from about 14 years of age. Oh, wow. But things like that, I think learning to work and not ever expecting anything from other people. I didn't even know. I remember I used to train with a guy. We'd finish washing up at this restaurant at about 11, 12 at night. Then we'd go run till 1 a.m. And then I'd hear about these kids doing part of the TA high performance program. And I was just like, what? They get to train all day. They get funding for a massage. They get this and that. And I was so jealous, but I just when I look at it, I think, 95% of them maybe just all dropped out over the following years. Aaron Royal was the one guy who stuck at it. And I think there's a lot to be said for just learning how to work and chip away. And that's something
great advice.
Yeah, I think just be consistent and work hard.
No, that's mate.
It's nothing revolutionary.
I love that though.
It can pay off.
There's no shortcuts, right? It's like, no, you just got to keep chipping away, pile that the wood pile up, just keep logging trees. That's awesome. And a good reminder, to be honest. All right, next one. Who would you want to have dinner with? Non-family, living or dead? 3 people.
Oh, you should have given me this before we started, Greg.
I did. I did. You just didn't read the email.
Oh, no. 3 people. Oh, this is Craig Alexander. Always enjoy hanging out with him.
Oh, that's awesome.
Bob Hawke.
A Hawkey. Love it.
Number 3 would be, we've got probably Luke Longley.
Love it.
Big fan of him. Yeah.
Yeah. What an awesome 3. For people who don't know, Bob Hawke was our Prime Minister way back in 80 to 85, I guess. Did you watch on Netflix the America's Cup Netflix show? I don't know if it's just in Netflix in Australia, but it's very cool. And they have Hawkey on. It was his last interview he did before he passed away. And it was a very special time. You probably weren't even born, but mate, 1982, I remember as a 10-year-old and Hawkey, after we won the America's Cup, first time in 100 years, over 100 years that the Americans had ever been beaten. And they came from 3-1 down to win 4-3. And Australia it was just, Hawkey got on with beer in hand. This is our Prime Minister at the time. He said, any boss that fires an employee for not turning up to work today is a bum. It was basically, it just went viral. It was such a special time in Australian history. And I look back almost from that 1982 as the real boom. I think Australia was a little quiet in the 70s, but I think in the 80s and then 90s, we had this real push in sport that just, I think it was almost from that moment. I think it was such a pivotal time in Australian history. It was very special.
And I think we're actually sort of going through it again with the Matildas.
Mate, so good.
If I could explain to you the energy that's here around it. I was in Sydney on the weekend for City to Surf, but we had a big screen up where I was staying and, a few different families all watching it together. But you could hear every single house just yelling, at every moment through that game.
Yeah. And this is the quarterfinal game we're talking about, people, because this episode will come out. We'll actually have the final already decided, but the quarterfinal game between Australia and France, and it went to penalty shootout and just, I think it was like the 10th one finally won it for Australia. My goodness. It was I was up in the mornings.
In and out of rhythm.
It was awesome. No, you're right.
I think too, it shows to me how, I've also seen the dark side of sport, where, there's, pros with eating disorders and all these sort of problems that come. And then I see the side now where it's like sport really does bring people together. And I'm just seeing it all again with the Matildas. It's fantastic.
It's funny. We have a rule at home. We don't have any TV. We don't have any Netflix, but except for sport. And I grew up in a house where that's all I had with my brother. It was like all we ever had was sport on TV. And so, I was up at 4, which is my normal time, but I knew the Matildas were playing and I came in and it was 0-0 and I'm watching the whole thing. And then my daughter gets up at, 5:30. And so we're watching the whole game, it was just, I don't know, to watch it with my 5-year-old on my lap now, who's half American, half Australian, who I'm kind of like, hey, you should probably represent Australia, but whatever. But it was I don't know, for me, to your point, it's really special. And to see women's sport to be, I don't know, it's like I said to my wife, honestly, look, I enjoy all sport, but I could watch that women's soccer game, and if you'd changed all those heads of all the players and put men's heads on it, I wouldn't know any different.
No,
the level
is amazing.
The level is so outstanding. Yeah. And I don't know, for anybody that would, it's women's sport. No. You watch the way these women
far and away the most watched of, not even sporting event, television show in Australia, the last 2 games. It's just smashing the records.
That's awesome. Even on the gym here. I'm in Lifetime Gym over here in Florida, and on the TVs, they have the replay of the Australia-French game constantly in the mornings when I'm there. They're playing it over and over again. It's happening, and we've got the 2 semi-finals coming up this week and then the final on the weekend. Like I said, by the time this show comes out, we'll know the results, but I'm just hoping Australia can rebound after such an emotional, that was, I don't know, I'm a big one, like we talked about earlier in the show, I'm a big one about hormones and emotions, and I struggle to see them. I don't know. I shouldn't.
I know exactly.
I don't want to put the Mickey on him, but it was like the French retired.
So many times you can go to that level.
Go that deep and have that. So anyway, we'll see what happens. They're playing England in a couple of days' times. But mate, this has been awesome. I did have rapid fire questions for you, but I think I've been going for quite a while with you. Yeah. I know you got family and work you got to be doing, but mate, I've really thoroughly enjoyed this chat with you. What's next for you? What's coming up?
Mate, I've just been enjoying doing some running races. I've got my heart ablation coming up, so then
okay.
I'm never fully retired, but I can't see myself. I'd love to get back into some, even if it was some local racing once the heart's all sorted. But I take some medication which makes me fall asleep while I do these running races and stops my heart going out of rhythm. So it's been fun to do that. I've got looking at a 100K race in December.
Oh wow!
I'm still dealing with the transition, Greg. So having something to focus on, and running is such a beautiful sport in that you can do 6 hours a week and you're still training quite a lot for a runner. So that's been fun. And so I'll tick off a few more running races and just try and stay healthy and keep building the coaching, which I'm loving doing.
Yeah, and that's Reed Performance Coaching. If people want to... Performance
Group, rpgcoaching.com.
Okay.
Check it out. We've got a lot of things coming up. We've got an aero camp coming up in January that we need to get a few more people on board to bring over some aerodynamic experts. So, yeah.
Where's that camp at?
It's in Jindabyne.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. Great old stomping ground in the snowy mountains of Australia. For any internationals that are listening, could be a good way to go and enjoy some summertime in Australia.
And learn how to get 15 watts of free speed.
I love it. That with your shoes, mate. we should be good to go. All right, Reedy, mate, this has been a true pleasure. I really enjoy our chats. I actually do think we have a business in mind coming up with helping athletes transition to civilian life. I think we can do it with military and first responders as well, but we can always start with athletes, and then I think there's something here. But, mate, thoroughly enjoyed this chat. I can't believe it's actually an hour 15. It was one of those that just went flying by, so I really appreciate you, buddy.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, no, it was really cool to chat. Anytime you want me up at 6 a.m, I am.
All right, mate. Maybe make this a weekly thing. No, I'm just kidding. That'd be great. All right, buddy. Everybody else, thank you for listening. You can find all the show notes and timestamps at bennettendurance.com/media. All right. Stay on the line, Tim. Cheers, mate.